Let's have a look at this airbrush tool. It's a little bit different looking than your regular pen. It's quite comfortable to hold, kind of similar to you would hold a traditional airbrush. And if you look on the top here, you can see that we have a wheel. And we can adjust this wheel. It has 100 levels. And we can set any of the dynamics to work on that. The front uses a pressure sensitive nib. We have an extra switch on top and an eraser at the back, which can be programmed. Now the advantage in having this scroll wheel, or this wheel at the top, and the pressure sensitivity at the front is that we can control different dynamics independently. Let me explain. Let's grab a brush here. And I'm just going to grab a typical brush. We'll go into the presets here, and we've got the sensitivity here set to size. So if I press light, it's thin. If I press thick, it goes lighter. Now what if we want to also control the opacity? So if we go under here and we turn other dynamics on and we turn the pen pressure set to opacity, now what happens is we draw a thin stroke. It also has a light opacity, and then it gets darker as we get thicker. What if we want to be able to control the opacity and the size independently? Well, we can do this by going into opacity and changing this now to this stylus wheel, and now we can adjust this. Now notice as I go thin and thick, the opacity doesn't change. Now if I scroll the wheel back about halfway and now go thin and thick, notice that we can control it. I'll go back a little bit more. See, so we can control the opacity now completely independent in the size, and this opens up a lot of creative options. So let's have a look at another way we could work with this. Let's give it a soft edge. Let's just drop the hardness down. And notice if I start to work here and I just start to, let's have a look here, make sure the hardness is set. Yep. And we go hard, and notice that we can begin to build up some kind of a shading just by going over it at different times. And of course we could use a much bigger brush, typically you would for something like that, so we can do this nice soft airbrushing effect just like you would in a traditional airbrush. And at any time I can do a nice sharp edge just by using a light touch, and I can even pull back the wheel and I have this kind of control. Alright, so that's the kind of theory that we're working with here. Let's go in and actually use it practically. So I'm just going to close that out. And here's an illustration that I created of a cell phone. And this was completely illustrated in Photoshop from scratch. So look at this area here. It kind of has this feeling of dimension or three-dimensional feel just by adding shading. So let's create something similar to that right now. I'm just going to create a new layer. And let's go to our brushes, and we're going to choose a brush. Let's use a soft edge brush. Maybe something around 35. Maybe a little bigger. Let's go up a little bit bigger. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the shape dynamics. We want to adjust the size by pen pressure. But now we want to adjust the opacity by the stylus wheel, and also set the flow to stylus wheel. Flow is the amount of paint that's coming out. If the flow is turned up high, paint comes out very quickly. If it's turned down low, that means that as we hold it here, it slowly builds up the paint. So we want to set both of those for the stylus wheel so they can be controlled by the little button here. So let's go ahead and start to draw something. So let's grab our elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to hit the shift key, and I'm just going to draw an ellipse. And I can drag that around by using the space bar. So let's do that, and we're going to build up some kind of a little dimensional feel here. It's probably going to look more like a bubble than anything. But let's grab our brush, and with our settings, how we chose them, in fact, let's choose the brush size a little bit bigger. Let's make the diameter just a bit bigger. So what we're going to do now is, with black as the foreground, I'm going to pull the wheel to about halfway so we can start to build up. Now notice as I use a light touch, we get this very thin edge as I press harder, I get a thicker edge. So I can create these little tapered edges here. And it would be very difficult to create that kind of a shape using just a standard pen. We could do it using the standard pen, but we would have to a low opacity and just come back and work on it a little bit harder. Let's switch this around, and now we're going to use a light one. So I'm using a light touch, and then as I get towards the middle, I go heavier, and then a lighter touch as I go towards the ends. And then what that's doing is it's just building up our shape there. If it doesn't come out fast enough, just pull the wheel back a little bit to increase the opacity. And you can see that the pressure right now is only affecting the size. And if I turn off this, you can see we get this nice little bubbly effect here. See, it almost looks three-dimensional, and that's just because I've been using the shading. I can move this around wherever I want. And you can see here how we've been able to control the shapes of those. And it's more or less, you know, what I did up here, except in this case I've used a harder edge around there. I just used a feather on here to create that softer effect. But we can create this effect that looks like a little bit like a bubble. So you can see by using this airbrush, it just enables it a little bit easier to create these kind of effects. And you can see the pressure sensitivity and shading enables us to create a three-dimensional depth. Now, if I wanted to make that look a little bit more depth, I could drop a little drop shadow under there if I wanted. There's a lot of different options I could do here. But you know, we could do that. We could set a drop shadow. Let's have a look at our distance. Just drop that out a little bit. And you can see how we could control that, just to give us that little bit more depth and dimension.